The elevator doors slid open with a soft, polished sound that felt far too smooth for the chaos inside Tu Tian's chest, and before she could even take a full breath, the world she had known seemed to vanish behind her like a door that had quietly, irreversibly closed, leaving her standing in the middle of a life that did not feel like hers. Not yet, maybe not ever. Jack stepped forward first, confident, composed, as if he belonged to every inch of this towering glass building, his hand gently guiding little Bo beside him, while Tu Tian followed a step behind, her fingers tightening unconsciously around the strap of her bag, her eyes darting across the polished marble floors, the shimmering lights, the unfamiliar faces dressed in elegance she had only ever seen from a distance, and for a moment she wondered if she had made a mistake that could not be undone. "Come on," Jack said softly, turning back with a reassuring smile. "You're going to love it here." She forced a small smile in return, but her heart didn't believe him, because everything felt wrong, too quiet, too clean, too distant, nothing like the village, nothing like home. Bo, on the other hand, was already running ahead, his laughter echoing through the hallway as if he had been born into this life, his small shoes tapping excitedly against the floor. "Mom, look! It's so big!" he shouted, spinning in circles near the living room window. The apartment overlooked the entire city, a breathtaking view of lights stretching endlessly into the horizon, cars moving like tiny streams of glowing dots, the sky painted in shades of fading gold and cold blue. Tu Tian stepped closer, slowly, and stared. It was beautiful, but it felt distant, like looking at a world she wasn't part of. Jack came up behind her, wrapping an arm gently around her shoulders. "This is just temporary," he whispered. "For Bo, for his future." She nodded. Of course, for Bo. That was why she had said yes. That was why she had left everything behind. The small wooden house, the mornings filled with mist and birdsong, the people who knew her name without needing to ask. Here, no one knew her, and maybe worse, no one cared. The next morning came too quickly. The city woke up with noise, with urgency, with a rhythm that did not wait for anyone, and by the time Tu Tian opened her eyes, Jack was already dressed, adjusting his tie in front of the mirror. "I have an early meeting," he said, glancing at her. "I'll be back late." She sat up slowly. "So soon?" He hesitated for just a second. "Things are a bit intense right now," he admitted. She nodded again. Another quiet acceptance. Bo ran into the room, already dressed, full of energy. "Dad, when are we going to my new school?" Jack smiled, crouching down. "Soon, champ. You're going to love it." And Bo believed him, just like that, so easily. Tu Tian watched them and felt something she didn't want to name. Not jealousy, not regret, but something close. That same day, everything began to shift. Jack left. Bo was taken by a driver to visit his new school, and Tu Tian was alone. She stood in the middle of the apartment, the silence pressing against her like an invisible weight, heavier than the noise of the village ever was, because at least there, silence had warmth, it had meaning, it had life. Here, silence felt empty. She tried to keep busy, cleaning, organizing, touching things that already looked perfect. Nothing needed her, and that hurt more than she expected. Later that afternoon, the doorbell rang. Tu Tian opened it slowly and froze. Jack's mother stood there, elegant, composed, her gaze sharp yet controlled, scanning Tu Tian from head to toe in a single glance that said more than any words ever could. "I came to check on you," she said calmly. Tu Tian stepped aside. "Please, come in." The older woman walked in, her heels clicking softly against the floor, her eyes observing everything. She murmured. "At least you're keeping things clean." Tu Tian didn't respond. She wasn't sure how. "I brought some things for Bo," she continued, placing a bag on the table. "He needs to get used to a proper environment." A proper environment. The words lingered, sharp, subtle, intentional. "And you," she added, finally looking directly at Tu Tian. "You'll need to adjust as well." Tu Tian met her gaze. I'm trying. Jack's mother tilted her head slightly. Trying is not enough in this world. The conversation didn't last long, but it left a mark. That night, when Jack returned, exhausted, his tie loosened, his shoulders heavy, Tu Tian hesitated before speaking. Your mother came today. Jack sighed. I figured she would. She's concerned, Tu Tian said carefully. Jack let out a dry laugh. That's one way to put it. Silence settled between them again, different this time, more fragile. I know it's not easy for you, Jack said finally, sitting beside her. But this is important. For Bo, for all of us. She looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't immediately agree. I feel like I don't belong here, she admitted quietly. Jack's expression softened. You belong with me. That should have been enough, but it wasn't, because being with him and belonging here were not the same thing. Days passed. Bo adapted quickly, coming home with stories, new friends, new words, new excitement in his eyes, and every time he spoke, Jack listened with pride, with hope, with certainty that he had made the right decision. But Tu Tian began to disappear, not physically, but slowly, silently. She spoke less, smiled less, watched more, and questioned everything, even herself. One evening, standing alone by the window, staring at the endless city lights, she whispered something so soft that even she barely heard it. Who am I here? And for the first time since she arrived, she didn't know the answer. The sound of the city never truly stopped. It only changed its rhythm, from the loud rush of the day to the distant hum of the night, a constant reminder that life here did not pause for anyone. And as Tu Tian stood by the window once again, watching the endless stream of lights below, she felt something inside her finally reach a breaking point. Not sudden, not explosive, but slow, quiet, inevitable, like a thread stretched too thin for too long. Behind her, the apartment was silent, too silent. Jack was still at work. Bo was asleep. And she felt invisible. It had been weeks. Weeks of trying, weeks of adjusting, weeks of telling herself that this was temporary, that this was for Bo, that this was the right thing to do. But somewhere along the way, she had started to disappear. Earlier that day, she had gone to Bo's school for the first time alone. Something small, something simple, something any mother should be able to do without hesitation. But the moment she stepped through the gates, she felt it again. That familiar tightness in her chest, the weight of eyes that didn't need to say anything to be understood. Other parents stood in small groups, dressed elegantly, speaking with confidence, their laughter light, effortless, belonging to a world that felt carefully curated and closed. Tu Tian walked past them quietly, but she felt every glance, every whisper. Who is she? Is she really Jack's wife? She doesn't look like she belongs here. No one said it loudly, but she heard it anyway, because sometimes silence speaks louder than words. When Bo ran toward her, smiling, excited, none of that mattered for a moment. Mom, did you see the playground? It's huge. She smiled. Yes, I saw. And for that moment, she tried to believe it was enough, but on the way home, sitting alone in the car, watching the city blur past the window, the question returned. Who am I here? That evening, everything came to the surface. Jack came home later than usual, exhaustion written all over his face, his phone still buzzing with messages, his mind clearly somewhere else even as he stepped inside. Hey, he said quickly, placing his bag down. Sorry, today was… I went to Bo's school, she interrupted. He paused. Oh? How was it? The question was simple, but the answer wasn't. Different, she said. Jack nodded, distracted, already checking something on his phone. That's normal. It'll take time. Time. Everything needed time. But how much? And your mother called, Tu Tian continued. That made him look up. What did she say? She wants Bo to start extra classes. Etiquette, language, social skills, Tu Tian said slowly. She said it's necessary. For his future. Jack exhaled. She's not wrong. The words hit harder than he expected. And what about me? Tu Tian asked, her voice still calm, but something underneath it had changed. Jack frowned slightly. What do you mean? She also said I should take classes, Tu Tian continued, to learn how to behave, how to speak, how to fit in. Jack hesitated. That might actually help, he said carefully. It's not a bad idea. Silence. Heavy, sharp, and then something broke. So I'm the problem? She asked, her voice no longer steady. Jack blinked, surprised. That's not what I said. But that's what you meant, she replied, stepping back slightly. Everything about me needs to change, right? No, Tian, you're twisting this. I left everything, she said, louder now, the emotions finally spilling out. My home, my life, everything I knew, for you, for Bo. Her voice trembled. And now, I'm not enough. Jack ran a hand through his hair, frustration rising. That's not fair, he said. I'm doing this for us. For us? She repeated, almost laughing through tears. Or for the version of us that fits your world? The question hung in the air, unanswered, because maybe he didn't know. Bo's small voice suddenly came from the hallway. Mom? Dad? They both froze. He stood there, half awake, confused, sensing something was wrong. Tu Tian immediately wiped her tears. It's okay, she said softly, forcing a smile. Go back to sleep. He hesitated, then slowly nodded and walked back. The silence that followed was unbearable. I don't want to fight, Jack said, his voice quieter now. Neither do I, she replied. But sometimes, not fighting didn't mean things were okay. That night, neither of them slept, and the next morning, something changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. Tu Tian woke up before anyone else. She stood in the middle of the apartment one last time, looking around at the space that never truly became hers, at the life that felt borrowed, at the version of herself she no longer recognized. Then she packed a small bag. Not everything, just enough. When Jack woke up, he found her by the door. His heart dropped instantly. Tian, what are you doing? She looked at him, calm, but distant. I need to breathe, she said. The words were simple, but they carried everything. You're leaving? He asked, disbelief creeping in. I'm not running away, she replied. I just need to find myself again. And what about us? His voice tightened. She hesitated, and that hesitation said more than any answer. Appeared behind him, eyes wide. Mom? Tu Tian knelt down, holding him gently. I'm not going far, she whispered. I just need a little time. He clung to her. Come back soon. Her heart shattered. I will, she said softly, but even she didn't know if that was true. Jack stood there, unable to move, unable to stop her, because deep down, a part of him understood that this wasn't something he could fix with words, not anymore. She walked past him, slowly, without looking back, and the door closed. The apartment felt emptier than ever. Days later, Jack stood in his office, staring at the city below, the same view that once felt like success, now feeling like a distance he couldn't cross. His phone buzzed, a message from Tu Tian. I'm okay, don't worry, take care of Bo. That was all, no explanation, no promise, just distance. And somewhere far away, back in a quieter place where the air felt different, where the noise didn't suffocate her thoughts, Tu Tian stood alone, looking at the horizon, trying to remember who she was before all of this, trying to decide if she could ever go back, or if she needed to become someone new. And between them, there was still love, but also space. And sometimes, space changes everything. Their story wasn't over, but for the first time, no one knew where it was going next.